All right.
So yeah, I actually wanted to bring this up because it came up in the conversation about God as a mind. So it's really connecting it to Spinoza again. He incorrectly misunderstood the Rambam to mean that God is a mind. And we see this common misunderstanding by brilliant thinkers like Dr. Micah Goodman, for example. What's causing this misreading of the Rambam, and why is this idea even problematic?
So we have to give a shout out to our shiur from many years ago. Is Hashem a mind? Very famous shiur we did years ago.
Plug your channel right now.
Best first year ever.
For Yeshivat Deah VeHaskel. You can find it on the website of ydvh.org, or you could find it on SoundCloud. Shiur that I think was really important for us, clarifying certain fundamental ideas several years back about is Hashem a mind. Now, I can't claim, I don't know what Dr. Micah Goodman would say if I just come out and make the assertion that, oh, he made it, this is a blunder of his or a blunder of Spinoza. Maybe they would give me some pushback for that. I'm the one claiming that they misunderstood, but I think that when you look at the evidence, it's clear that they both made similar errors in understanding what the Rambam means. The Rambam talks about God being the knower, the known, and the knowledge. Right? And so everyone says, oh, so obviously in the end, the Rambam is really giving up on his whole project of there's no way to describe God and there's no positive assertion we can make about God, because at the end of the day, he is making a positive assertion. He's saying that God is the knower, the known, and the knowledge. And Spinoza took this to, and what Micah Goodman points out in his book is that Spinoza took this idea as pointing to his own revolutionary concept that okay, well, if there's an identity between the mind and what is known, and we say that in a certain way the mind merges with its knowledge, with that which it knows, and there's a connection, so that, and since God knows everything, that means in a certain way he is merged with everything. And Spinoza kind of took it to the next level and said that God is existence. Okay, meaning God knows all and is all. Then, if God knows all, and if knowledge and the knower become one, that means God knows all and he is all. Okay, and that's when Spinoza's idea is. In the very beginning of the ethics, he talks about this. He spells this out, and he makes this argument based on his assumption about the relationship between knowledge and the known and existence in the beginning of the ethics. But so Micah Goodman, Dr. Goodman, comes to the conclusion that, well, yeah, the Rambam really punted in the end, basically, or he fumbled. He was on this campaign to try to claim that we can't say anything positive about God, but at the end of the day, he does say something positive about God, and it leads right into Spinoza's idea. But but it's really a fundamental misunderstanding of what the Rambam is talking about, because I was surprised then, and I'm still surprised that they. I'm not surprised at Spinoza, because I think I was more surprised about Spinoza back then, because but having thought about it more, Spinoza does have this trend of reading the thoughts of other people as if they are his, validating or fitting in with his own vision, not because he was, I don't think it's because he was malicious. I think it's because he thought his ideas were so compelling that it made sense to him that these great thinkers would be thinking along the same lines that he was, and that was his thing. But Micah Goodman, I'm surprised that he didn't see this, because he studied the Moreh Nevuchim for so long, and the Rambam in several places mentions that the type of knowledge God has is not the type of knowledge that we have, and so therefore, when we're talking about God's knowledge, we're not talking about the same thing altogether. Okay, but so saying God is the knower, the knowledge, and the known is still just saying we have no idea what we're talking about, right? Right, because so what are you really saying? We'll get to why he says that, let's say, okay? But like, by the way, even in Patach Eliyahu, I know that you guys love Kabbalah, even in Patach Eliyahu, what does it say? He has Chokhmah, right? Velo b'Chokhmah Yediah, and he has Binah, right? But not with Binah, right? He has understanding, but not with Binah. Right? Meaning we don't have, Hashem knows, but not with knowledge. He understands, but not with understanding. It's literally what the Rambam says in Moreh Nevuchim. He has like the Rambam says it's towards the end of the first book of the Moreh. He says, the God has ability. He's able, but without ability. He knows, but without knowledge. Right? And so on and so forth. Meaning, we don't know, we can't use any term to describe God. So anything that we're saying, we don't really mean it. So even if we say God is a mind, we don't mean that. So immediately what do? We jump to the idea that God is a mind like our minds. Because, he used a term that was a positive term. That's exactly what the Rambam spent the entire Moreh Nevuchim and the entire, beginning of Yeshivat Deah Torah trying to warn you against making that kind of a leap, because it's so appealing to try to find something we can grasp onto that will make sense out of God and put him into our terms. So he grasped onto the idea of mind, okay? What's the real reason why the Rambam has this formulation of God as the knower and the known and the knowledge? So I believe I mentioned in that shiur, going way back, very simply, because when we learn something about the external world, our mind is to adapt to the new information. When you gain an insight into something, you now have been affected by that insight. You internalize that insight. You now see the world through the perspective of that insight. Let's say you saw many objects fall, and then you learn the law of gravity. So now when you see an example of gravity, you process it through the understanding of the law of gravity that you now comprehend, okay? You didn't have that understanding before. It changed you. It came into your, you internalized it, and it shifted your mind. Even if you get new information, you read in the newspaper today, such and such event happened, such and such took place, this discovery was made, or this event occurred. So you now have a knowledge you didn't have before. So you're a different person than you were before because you took in new information. Now, the information it could just be information that goes in and out, in one ear and out the other, or it could be information or knowledge that actually transforms the way that you think, or changes the way that you look at the world, or alters your response to future events in some way. In other words, you've adapted now. And that's what the philosophers mean when they say that there's an identity between the knowledge and the knower and the known, because your whole way of viewing the phenomenon that you learned about is different than it was before. You've internalized a new perspective, and your relationship, and so that knowledge has become a part of you, and your relationship to the object of the knowledge has also changed. Imagine you're a person who believes the sun is a god. Then you learn that no, the sun is a ball of gases and whatever it is, right? So now that you understand the physics behind it, your relationship to you've internalized a new perspective, and now when you see the sun, you don't think it's a god, right? You think you have a different relationship to the object of the knowledge. Okay, there's an identity, the idea that the philosophers talk about of the active intellect, which is a much maligned idea among some people for whatever reason, I don't really understand why, is just explaining a very basic issue, which is my mind. Like the philosophers always say that the same agent that puts the forms into matter puts the ideas into the mind. What does that mean? That means that when I understand, there's a law of gravity out there. I'm just using that as the simplest law of nature that we're familiar with, okay? There's a law of gravity in reality. Before it was discovered, it was there. Before it was ever known, it was always there, okay? And once a person when Newton discovered the law of gravity, okay, all of a sudden, the same law of gravity that shapes the universe is now shaping the way he sees the universe. That's what it means that the active intellect is what puts form into matter, and actualizes our mind, what puts the form into our mind. Meaning now, all of a sudden, every experience of a falling object that you had is recategorized and reorganized by this principle of the law of gravity, just like that principle of the law of gravity is actually governing and organizing the reality outside your mind. It's now governing and organizing the reality inside your mind. So that's the idea, right? So that means that a change occurs in you when you get new knowledge. And to use the example of, when they would show like the stock tickers every second, things are changing on the, when they look at the thing, they used to have I don't know if they still have those kinds of things on the news, but they used, it shows every second, right? Every second, the information around you is changing. Every second, you can be growing and adapting to your environment. You can be growing, you can be learning, you can be gaining new understanding and so on from your environment. The idea is that if God in every moment is learning new things, then that means God is changing in every moment. If God is looking to the external world for his knowledge, so that's the type of knowledge we have. We look to the external world and we gain knowledge from the external world that we then internalize. If God is looking to the external world and then internalizing knowledge, that means God is constantly changing and in flux, okay? And that would be, and this is why many of the philosophers wanted to say that God doesn't even know particular things, because particulars change all the time. Universal ideas are the things that are stable. So that's why certain philosophers like the Ralbag and Ibn Ezra even alludes to this in certain places in his commentary, that God really just knows the universals. He doesn't know the particulars. This was one of the solutions that philosophers wanted to propose to this problem. Why did they propose the problem that God would only know general ideas and not particular things? Because particular things are constantly changing. So that means that God's mind, so to speak, is constantly changing. Because if you think of every piece of information as a dot on a screen or a point on a screen, and they're constantly they're constantly changing, or the ticker of the tickers on the stock report are constantly, the numbers are changing. It's like God's mind is constantly in flux. If he's just looking at if he just knows the universals, so that's permanent and stable and his mind is not changing. Okay, but again, that's still presupposing that his knowledge is of something outside himself. Okay, so and this,
the last point. Can you repeat the last point?
That it's still presupposing that his mind, he is a mind focused on something outside himself. And so therefore, whenever something new comes in, his mind would have to adapt to it. So that's why they wanted to say that he only knows the universal things that don't change. That would be better. Okay? Because they don't want God to change. So what is the Rambam introducing when he says God is the knower, the knowledge, and the known? And he even says this is something that our mouth can't even say and our ears can't even hear. I think he says that in the Mishneh Torah even, that he uses that language, that this idea is something that our minds can't even comprehend, and we say it and it doesn't even mean anything, right? To us. He uses that language. Right, because he says, נמצאת אומר, הוא היודע, והוא הידוע, והוא הדעה עצמה, כל אחד, ודבר זה אין כוח בפה לאומרו, ולא באוזן לשומעו, ולא בלב האדם להכירו על בוריו.
He's already negating it.
He's telling you this thing that I said doesn't really mean what you think it means, because we don't have any idea what we're saying. So why is now a person coming and saying that it means that God is a mind, in the sense that they conceive of the term of mind having a specific meaning, when he clearly says it's something that the mouth cannot say and the ear can't hear and the mind can't grasp what it is. So if the Rambam is making a positive assertion, then he's negating it right afterwards. But in the Moreh Nevuchim, many times he says he knows, but without yediah, right? Meaning whatever he is. Why do we call him the mind? Because the mind is the opposite of matter. That's the only reason. Okay? Meaning when we're saying the only thing we have experience with, distinct from matter, is mind. Idea, thought, mind. So we say God is mind, meaning God is distinct from the physical creation. Okay? And he is completely independent of it, which means he is the knower, he is the knowledge, he is the known, meaning he is completely in and of himself, self-sufficient, not in any way dependent upon or influenced by the creation, the way that a mind that's engaging with things outside itself would be. That's what it means. It's not saying anything positive about God at all. It's saying something negative, that he isn't subject to the fluctuations of reality. He isn't in any way tied to or dependent upon a reality external to himself. That's what it means. God is the knower, the knowledge, and the known. It doesn't. So when they jump and say, "Oh, the Rambam is actually making a positive assertion here," he's very clearly not, because he himself says that he's not saying anything basically understandable to the human mind. And in the Moreh Nevuchim, several times he makes the same exact point, where he says that when we talk about God having knowledge, we don't really mean God having knowledge. So then, but people are grasping, they want to find some metaphor, some analogy, some way to bridge the gap, to be able to put God in our terms. And so they seek after these crumbs that the Rambam leaves to try to say that even the Rambam said he's a mind. But all he means is he is something outside of the framework of experience and completely independent of it, so much so that we say that even his mind knows himself, because otherwise he would be knowing something else, and that would make him dependent on something else.
Oh, so he's differing from the Ralbag.
Yeah.
Because the Ralbag would say he knows generalities,
universals and not
universals. The Rambam would say
he knows everything, but the way that he knows it, meaning we're not going to say that he's ignorant of anything. We would never ascribe ignorance to God, but your assumption that the way that God knows those particulars is the way that I know the external world, and therefore to know particulars means that my mind is changing, that's because you're trying to process God's mind in terms of your mind.
Right, because
just like if I am constantly getting new information and my mind is therefore adapting to the new information, and the particulars are constantly changing, that means I'm constantly changing. Because right now, Bentzi's standing, Bentzi's sitting, Bentzi's nodding. Oh, this leaf fell here, and this thing happened over here. So every second, God's mind is getting new information. So that's what they didn't want. So the Rambam is saying it's true that God knows all those things. But when I know those things, it's because I'm looking at the outside world, and it's coming into my mind, and I'm filtering it, and I'm processing it. So I'm constantly adapting, and my mind is changing, collecting new information, sifting it, and so on. And through a process where I am beholden to the external world. And therefore, yes, the particulars of my knowledge are constantly shifting as I learn more. That is not how God gets knowledge of the world. It's the world.
Right. So
it's the same problem. It all comes, it's the same problem as the foreknowledge versus free will. Same exact issue. That because how could it be that God knows the future if I have free will? You're assuming that God knows the future the same way you would know the future. How would you know the future? You would know the future if it was predetermined, because you have no way to know the future. You have no way to know the future except if it's predetermined. If there's any element of variability or possibility of difference in the future, then you could never say that you know it. You could say, oh, probably will be, but you can't say definitely, right? So if you know something absolutely for sure, it's because it's predetermined. So you say, oh, well, then it must be that if God knows that tomorrow I'm going to have cornflakes for breakfast, that must mean that it was predetermined, right? But that's not true. That's not how God knows it. God's mind doesn't collect information and make predictions based on causality the same way that a human mind does. You're assuming that God is using cause and effect and the predetermined nature of cause and effect to know something about the future. That's assuming his mind works the way our mind works.
Which is the Ralbag's mistake. Which
is the mistake of almost everybody except the people who listen to the Rambam.
Because he's assuming a certain mechanism of the way thought works and trying to fix that by saying, oh, he only knows universals. We're okay. But Rambam is saying, no, just completely take that mechanism off the map. It's a whole different.
Stop trying to, And so, and then the argument, of course, of like the Ralbag and others is, well, then you can't really say anything about God and so on and so forth. Can't say anything about him. And the Rambam would just be like, okay, that's better. Yeah. That's better, right? Say less. Like the story in the Gemara about the famous one that the Rambam loves, that story about the Chazan that starts saying Hagadol, V'Hagibor, V'Ha'amitz, V'Hachazak, and all these things. And then Rabbi Chanina says to him, have you finished saying all the praises of of God, meaning he was being sarcastic. Like, we shouldn't even say Hagadol Hagibor Vanoaz, and you're doing more than that, right? So yeah, you're right. Confine yourself to observing the wonders of God as expressed in his creation and his chokhmah. That's how we know that God is great, from his creations and the infinite chokhmah that we see. That's how we know that he is beyond that. Just like if you see a great lahavdil, if you see a great piece of music or a great piece of art or a masterpiece of writing or something like that, you know that there is a something behind it. In our case, a mind, in the human framework, a mind behind it that is the author of it. Or like Einstein said, when you look at the universe, it's like having a library of old books that nobody knows who put them there and nobody knows who wrote them, but you could see that they were placed and organized in a certain way and all that. That's exactly what the Rambam says the person's attitude should be towards the Borei Olam. Because that's all you can say once you start using, and it's sad that the Rambam spilled so much ink trying to emphasize that even when I'm saying God is a mind, I don't mean that God is actually a mind.
Yet everyone
even says it right there, even in the Mishneh Torah. Forget about the Morning Buchim where he says it 7-8 times. And then they still say, "Oh, look!" In the end, the Rambam backtracked. He said, "God's a mind." It's like it's a gotcha game that they're trying to catch him. The idea is so consistent and so clear. It's such a compelling idea, and it solves almost every problem in modern theology. Almost every problem in modern theology is created by the belief that God is somehow like human beings. And the Rambam solved all those problems, not like people said because he said, I don't know. He wasn't saying, I don't know. He's saying it's unknowable. That's it. That doesn't mean you can't have purpose. The mitzvot can't have purpose. No, the universe has purpose. Why God created it? Unknowable. It's just not knowable. Nobody will ever know. It's a waste of time. That's what it's talking about in Masechet Chagiga when it says, what is before, what is after, why did God create the universe? It's going to eventually be destroyed, right? So what about what is after? What is before? What is after? What is above? What is below? It's a waste of time to pursue those inquiries.
Right.